What's good, everyone? Wayne the Unknown here, and welcome to another episode of Cosplay Con Talk, where we basically discuss everything pertaining to the cosplay community and conventions. Tonight, we are doing another segment on Get to Know That Cosplayer, and tonight's featured cosplay guest is Brian. How you doing tonight, Brian?
Oh, so far so good. It's still kind of early though.
I hear that. So again, thank you for coming on for this podcast series of mine that I've been doing for a while to talk about, your cosplay experience and conventions and everything.
Sure, not a problem.
So, to begin, how long have you been cosplaying for?
Oh, legitimately, probably since I was about 10 or 11, sixth grade or so was my first costume contest that I won as a Ghostbuster. Because that was like the thing that made a huge impact on me. I got to see that opening night on Hollywood Boulevard, and then from there, obviously there was Halloween all the time, but well, every year anyway. And I was always really into the special effects stuff, was into costumes, and then joined theater in school. And then one thing led to another, and then started doing the con circuit. And my first major convention was in '89 at the San Diego Comic Con, back when it was still comics.
Oh,
Got to meet
jeez,
the Podfather.
that's like uh, 30 plus years right there.
Yeah, well, I'm old.
I think so. I think so far you'd be right now. I think you're the only guest so far on this series of mine who's done it for the longest. You're definitely in that category of as I put it, cosplay veterans.
Yeah. Oh, and I've seen some major changes just in the past 10 years, never
Oh,
mind prior to that.
jeez. I
I mean it.
mean,
Oh, go ahead.
I can't imagine, seeing the change of cosplay in the course of over 30 years.
Oh, it's been insane. I even took a pretty sizable break there for a while because of some of that environment was in a really weird state of flux, because there used to be a really defined line for me personally anyway between fan and fanatic. So one year, probably 96, it was, so yeah, it was the year the beginning of that year, that was when my son was born. I was at a Star Trek convention at the Union Plaza in Vegas. But back then, there really weren't necessarily just generic cons. They were very themed. So most of the Star Trek ones had a lot of Star Wars cosplayers, a lot of Doctor Who. It was kind of limited, but because it was themed with Star Trek, there was a like a trivia contest at the end of the convention, and the prize was an Enterprise D model and all that. And one of the questions came up about the diameter of the warp core, like on the B or something.
Mm-hmm.
And one guy answers, and then this other cat on the other side of him gets up and says, "You're wrong. That's such and such diameter, and blah blah blah." They started going back and forth. Meanwhile, the judges are up there looking through the omnibus, and then next thing you know, these two cats are right at each other, getting into it. And I was like, whoa, hold on. That's a little much. I'm not
Oh
gonna,
man, like
yeah.
in the era of like fantasy, just like fantasy and sci-fi cons before they become what they are now.
Yeah.
Uh,
I,
like I
you
think
know,
this is like when just I'm not trying to sound sexist or anything. This is like when just guys like you and me were dressing up going
oh,
to conventions.
and most of the women were one of maybe four characters. You saw a lot of Leia's, a lot of people of color were Uhura.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them were the green girl. I can't remember what the alien race is from Star Trek. I'm not a gigantic fan.
Uh,
Aware,
no,
know enough to be dangerous.
I hear you.
But it was always geared towards very specific, prominent female characters as far as the costumes are concerned. And then occasionally you see a slave Leia running around and stuff. But um, a lot of stormtroopers, a lot of Klingons, a lot of Captain Kirk's, a lot of red shirts. It was predominantly, that's all it was. Occasionally you'd see a couple Spider-Men, but the suits back then were nowhere near the quality they are now. I mean, a lot of this stuff wasn't, except for the Stormtroopers and some of the higher end ones, because they were a little bit more readily available. And
Right.
when I say readily available, the price tag that came with them, there's a reason why there's only one or two guys running around in them, and the 501st wasn't even a thing.
Nowadays, you're seeing like hundreds of thousands of people cosplaying as different types of stormtroopers, clone troopers,
Oh, well, sure.
and
Well,
just
and then the advent of
everything.
EVA foam being what it is now. I don't know if you had seen the Stormtrooper we had done about 5, 6 years ago, the
Probably,
big There was at Medford Public Libraries where we premiered it the first year.
Probably if it was 5-6 years ago, the first time I went to Medford Comic Con was back in 2017.
Oh, okay, then you probably yeah, okay. Well, anyway, that was based off of an action figure. What my point is like stuff like that was almost unattainable. Cardboard was a big thing. A lot of sewing. I think one of my first masks that I ever made, or quote unquote helmet, was actually a paper plate that I kind of wet and shaped to my face and then painted on the outside and stuff, and then just had a string with a hood over it. I don't know. I don't remember it being a specific character. It was just one of those things, and I think some of that was spurned from watching a Rick Baker interview over American Werewolf in London, and seeing that there's, if you've got an imagination and a will, you can do it, and you just keep chasing that obsession. Now, granted, ideally it would have been like foam latex, or even at that time gelatin was starting to come out. Now silicone's big thing, just for the effect side of it. But it was a blanket that I had, and a paper plate with probably like the Crayola, like kids' little plastic tubs of paint and stuff. So yeah, there's always been an interest and an obsession for it, and it's just really nice now to have far more outlets and be a lot more accepted than what it was then, because it was, hey, it's not Halloween yet, well, okay, I'm just wearing a t-shirt that's got like a print on it, man. I have a Boba Fett hoodie somewhere that everybody mistakes for dressing up as a costume, but now it's a lot more accepted.
Right.
It's awesome to see.
I've talked to the cosplayers who've been doing this for 10+ years, and they've been even saying that before EVA foam was a thing, they were using yoga mats or gym mats, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I use that for a few things to keep it softer, but mostly it's a liner on the inside because it doesn't heat form very well. Nothing really likes to adhere to it and stuff. But you worked with what you had. The other option was fiberglass. Vacuum forming was another one of those unattainable things because of and part of it, to be honest with you, Wayne, a lot of it was the supply end of it.
It was expensive, I imagine.
Oh, for sure. Warbler, you think Warbler is expensive now? Any kind of thermoplastic back then, you might have been able to find Wonderflex if you're lucky.
I mean, not unless you like worked for like a theater company or a movie company. You could just,
there you go.
You could just buy it in bulk.
Yep, and that's how I used to get my liquid latex. Was working for the theaters and a few of the haunted houses like Scream in the Dark and a few others in San Diego and stuff where I was at. Because otherwise, yeah, some of this stuff was unattainable, or you were reduced to just what was off the shelf at like say even at Albertsons or grocery store, because there weren't Spirit Halloweens, there wasn't Halloween City, that kind of stuff. So I mean, it just really built up. Nowadays, I hate to say it, but like the new Hasbro Spangler wand that just came out last year for the Ghostbusters, and the Spirit Halloween pack that came out in 18 was when it really started pushing. It's like, man, where was this stuff 30 years ago? As a kid, it was like, come on, like half the job's already done and it looks fantastic, and that kind of stuff. But oh, you damn kids got it so easy. And
no, I appreciate coming on, because like I said, you're probably the oldest cosplay veteran I've talked to who's been doing this since the early 90s. So you've actually seen the change of when cosplayers and conventions weren't really a big thing, to slowly transitioning to where it's like, okay, it's normal. You see more, no, I'm not, again, not trying to sound sexist or anything, but you see more females and everything, kids wanting to do it, their parents, their grandparents. It's like definitely changed.
Tremendously. Female involvement, different ages. And that's the one thing too, as far as the ages are concerned, it's spreading out both directions. Extremely young, extremely old. I was just at Rose City.
I've seen people in their 70s cosplay like Mario and Peach.
Yep. And my ex mother-in-law and her boyfriend, she went as Radagast and he went as Gandalf, and they were in their high 60s then. I made the staves for them and stuff. Nice. But they weren't really that familiar with the source material. But amazingly, well, the internet has changed the world in multiple ways. They found source pictures. She made the costumes, did the hat. I just had to make the staves with the lights and stuff in them because they didn't know how to do that. But full on, they ran with it, and I
remember seeing a Radagast and Gandalf at Medford Comic Con back in 2017.
That's them. That was them.
Oh, Nice. Speaking of cosplays, what would you say like your biggest build cosplay was that you've done over the course of your 30 years of cosplaying?
Um, one that like the biggest, or the one that I'm most proud of.
I guess the one that you're most proud of.
Oh, okay. I've got a whole shop full of a lot of half completed projects because I get distracted or always looking for the next big thing. But as far as completed, one of the ones that probably hit closest to home and made the biggest impact would have been the ODSTs when Andrew DFT had released the templates that made them easy for people because my son, my
Hmm.
stepson, my daughter, my ex-wife,
Yeah,
my
I
daughter's
remember.
friend.
I remember seeing you guys as the ODSTs back at Midford Comic Con. You
Yep.
guys did, I mean, really good, close to the source material for Halo.
Yeah. And if you saw how many of us there were, most
Hmm.
of those, I only built like 3 of those out of like the 8 that were there. And the whole thing was that it inspired well, a kid that I had known for a couple years through Facebook that ended up working with. He built his on his own. My daughter's friend, who she would have been what, like 16 at the time, built hers, and she went the hard route. She used that big double thick black on one side, gray on the other foam. She split it in half herself, then used it. Yeah, she went all out, did
I
it
mean,
like in a day.
I've seen a lot of ODST cosplays over the year, and I think it's pretty cool that you can just find this stuff on the internet
Yep.
now.
Yeah.
Because
Oh yeah.
before internet, you had to like either play the video game or watch the movie or TV show. So you're like, okay, well,
Well, yeah, and screen capturing wasn't really much of a thing.
no, you kind of like had to like pause the VA the movie or TV show at certain angles to get everything right.
Yeah.
You just had like cross your fingers and hope you got it right.
One of the guys that belongs to the Portland Ghostbusters that I'm actually a part of, which is kind of cool. His name is Sean Marshall. He scratch built his pack in '84 from memory, posters, and like the picture books and lobby cards, whatever he could get his hands on. But that was pretty much just a static image from one angle. Typically, if you might luck out and get a partial 3/4 view on one angle or the
Right.
other. But stuff like that just amazes me because I remember back in the day, heck, it's even going back with like audio and stuff, having to be right there, hitting record on a
Mm,
tape player.
yeah, if
Stuff.
I remember, when like, taking my phone to the TV and just, taking pictures or recording,
Yeah,
it's
same principle. And that was the thing too. You'd have to like freeze frame, sometimes take a Polaroid of your source
mhm.
image, things like that, to be able to get an accurate source. So some of the Star Wars ones back in the '70s were really impressive to me because that's how they were doing it. And a lot of it was just from memory, which
Right.
is, and then to see the level of accuracy. But then we go back to that obsession, that change. Yes, it was cool at Halloween. Yes, it was cool, like maybe at a specific con, which there were some in the early '80s. They were, like just trying to get to be their own thing.
They're your typical sci-fi fantasy cons and here
And
and
bare
comics here and
minimum.
there.
Well, most of them started off specifically as comics. That's what was gearing it towards. And then the costume stuff kind of came in trickle effect. And then you started seeing that switch. And that's what I was talking about. That big transition from the big Comic Con in '89 in San Diego, when it was still pretty much just comics.
Before it became
Then,
like a mainstream commercial con where they
yep,
announce the next movie or and they have these
yeah.
big name actors.
And that's pretty much what it is now. It's more of a media con, which, hey, it's fine. It gets it out there and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it just kind of loses sight of the source material or the inspiration for it all. And they're all starting to follow like that. And I think the bigger they get, people see more money.
The more expensive they're gonna get too.
That too.
I
And
was I was talking to someone who's like goes to New York Comic Con and you're lucky if you can pay enough for 1 day.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah. And never mind going to a guest panel or getting an autograph or anything like that.
No. What speaking of how much, so I'm at with this being 30 years ago, how much did it cost to go to San Diego Comic Con back in '89?
Oh, geez.
If you can remember that far back.
Me and my buddy Jeremy Quinn went because Sergio Aragones and Todd McFarlane was there. That was right when he took over Spider-Man. That was just in that ASM 300 days. I want to say we'd be lucky if it was $20 a person, but $20 and $89 for a kid like 16-year-old kid is, it's a little pricey, but
Oh yeah. Nowadays you're like looking at $100, like two,
oh,
$300
easy.
for all 3 days.
Yeah, easy. If not, I think Rose City was $70 a day.
That's still not bad. They're not, I mean, con prices, it depends. Like, our typical cons here, like Medford Comic Con is free for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Metal Arc and Anna Medford, they're, online $10 plus,
Yeah, they're
tax.
reasonable.
And
But
then,
look where we're at though, too. Flyspec, Oregon, with really not a huge population. I'm kind of glad for that. I like the little cons.
mhm.
Yukon was like that when Royce and Chris 51 first started it, and then it got sold to some media group, and the next year after they had taken it over, they were trying to be something that they shouldn't have been for such a
Mhm.
small environment. And then control went back to Royce, and he had to cancel that next year to regroup. And then obviously last year, the world ended. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, also this video won't be going up for a while. What was Road City like this year, for 2021?
okay, considering the amount of restrictions that they put in place at the last minute, the cancellation of some of their bigger guests, like Sean Astin backed out, but then Billy Boyd was there. Adam Savage, who we got to meet firsthand with the Ghostbusters, was fantastic. But what I'm getting at is, like, with some of the names kind of being a little nebulous.
I mean,
And
you had Christina Ricci there too.
yeah, I'm not going to comment on how she was behaving. That was not cool. But
Yeah, it's understandable.
yeah,
Some
but
guests, some guests go there because they get paid too. I mean, I'm
yep,
sure anyone who will listen to this I'm not trying to put hate on any of the guests, but some just
no,
go because it's another paycheck.
yep.
The fans get to meet them, so it's kind of a win-win for both.
You know the the one person that you could just smell the intent and almost contempt coming off of was it blew me away considering where she had started was Marina Sirtis. And I don't know if it was just a bad con or it was the last day and she was tired, but Jonathan Frakes was like damn near impossible to watch because he was so energetic. And Patrick Stewart was that way. Even Brent Spiner, Michael Dorn was there. These are all separate cons, by the way. And what I'm getting at is, like, some of these Trek people know damn well why they're popular.
Mm-hmm.
Walter Koenig was another one. He knew, or Nichelle Nichols. She was quite aware because they don't really have anything else as a claim to fame, minus Patrick. But Marina Sirtis just kind of seemed distant from everybody when you went to go get an autograph.
And
She
someone
was
like
very,
Nichelle Nichols, because she's known for Uhada.
yeah, and that's about it. But what I'm saying, most of those other people were very invested in the fandom. They embraced it. And like I said, I'm not talking bad about her. Like I said, it's a paycheck. I think some of them just don't quite understand what they instantly became a part of. And that has changed quite a bit over the years too, because it used to be just comic artists that you'd run into as far as like your guest panels and stuff like that. 15 years ago, I'd have never dreamed of seeing Carl Weathers at a comic convention.
Oh yeah, he was
Right?
at he was at Rose
Yeah,
City.
he was at Rose City.
He
Yeah, he
played
was
in
right.
Mandalorian. He also played as oh god.
Dylan in Predator.
Yep, and he also played in Rocky.
Yeah, that was Apollo Creed, man.
Yep.
Boom, boom. Yep. Yeah. So what I would say to some of these guys that, okay, so his biggest claim to fame for a long time was Apollo Creed. Then he gets into Predator, and he just stepped into a completely different fandom, but then
yeah.
he's gone back and forth. But what I'm ultimately getting at is the guests and the panels have changed dramatically. It used to be guys like Steve Johnson, Tom Savini, and some of these others that kind of embrace that. The EC Comics blend, Bill Gaines, a lot of comics guys, and
George
some of the
Perez and all
special,
them.
yeah, and some of those guys would come in to do these conventions, probably once again just as a paycheck, but at least to get their fandom out. Now you've got horror conventions. There's 3-day Wasteland weekends, and there's very specific genre based conventions that have changed
Oh yeah,
everything too.
video
And
game horror. And you got RTX in
yeah,
Austin.
There's that R2D2 builders convention in LA.
it's
Oh yeah.
it's crazy to see how cons changed, especially along with cosplays, which brings me back
Sure.
to my next question. How many cosplays have you done over the years? And what would you say was the hardest build aside from your ODST one?
The hardest one might have actually been Commander Shepard.
From Mass
And
Effect?
yeah,
Nice.
and the reason why I say that
his
would be
his N7 armor?
yeah, yeah.
Nice.
I went with the Mass Effect 2, and I make most of my builds to withstand microscopic inspection, which is kind of a character trait and a fault because
Kind of where
nobody
like
cares.
they take like a magnifying glass and make sure every detail is all there.
Yeah, I do that. Nobody else does. Nobody else cares.
I imagine there are some cosplayers who will like make them big cosplay builds and make sure they got everything right, that so that nothing tears, rips, falls off.
Yeah, now that's one thing. Structural integrity is one thing. I'm just talking about the level of detail and the preciseness of angles and things like that most people don't care, because realistically the 10-foot rule should apply at all times. Nobody cares what the underside is going to look like, but
Right.
I do the whole Peter Jackson mentality, you know, like the underside of all that armor had the horse stamps and the Rohirrim and nobody ever saw it, but it's there. And the reason why that one was difficult is up until Dave from Evil FX started making them, there wasn't a lot of available templates. There was very little screen grabs. There was very little 3D rips. So you had static images typically of Shepard standing in a heroic pose, and you would have to extrapolate that out, which is what I did. And of course, after I got halfway through, I ran across was it a Reddit forum or just a Facebook post randomly? No, I'll take that back. It was on the RPF. That would have helped tremendously had I known it existed. But anyway, that still involved a lot of scaling. I built it based on my image, not really thinking of mobility and the fact that realistically 3D rips, you know, the armor will go into itself.
Kind of like Master Chief's armor in Halo.
Yeah, if you watch, you know, you'll see the shoulder plate go over into the chest and stuff because it has to deform.
The whole glitch effect thing, yeah.
Yeah, and then heroic proportions suck because nobody's that big chested or that big armed.
Yeah, no, and video game character models, I mean, as detailed as they are, there's always be that like you see the armor in video games where it goes into like their neck or another piece of their armor. So a lot of people don't factor that in.
So no, and building that from that static image, the proportions were easy, kind of extrapolate down to myself, but it looked great when I got it on. I stood there. As soon as I went to go move, it was like, oh no, okay. I made it adjustable, but I had to walk stiff. The gigantic cod piece, because you know the heroic proportions, their torsos are elongated. Goes almost, except for the back piece, because I wanted to be able to sit down. I made it smaller. Didn't matter because the where it attaches, it didn't work anyway. So it's the only part that's not quite to the same scale. But that was the one that I had to put the most effort into, and it's a really simple armor, which is the infuriating part. If you look at it, there's not a lot to it. But...
Oh no, to his you know his default N7 armor, because I've played the games. I've been playing I've played the remastered trilogy. You know,
nice,
that recently came out, and you know, seeing how much detail they put into the first one. You know, like everything, like the armor and the remastered trilogy looks a whole lot better. And Commander Shepard is on my cosplay list later down the road because I do have the Omni Blade that I bought recently.
Nice. Yeah, I built the Predator first, the gun, then
his pistol.
The suit. Yeah, I have the pistol. Yeah.
Wait,
the pistol.
The pistol's a Scorpion, right?
The M3 Predator, and then it was the M9 of the big gun, which I can't remember the name of it. But
all I know is, you know, anyway, you made the guns too? Nice.
Yeah, I made the pistol first. I did a prototype, then made another one. And then was like, you know what, this looks really cool. I'm gonna go ahead and do it the suit. And yeah, like I said, that was probably the most infuriating and probably most difficult, even though overall it was fairly simple in design, but there's a lot of moving parts that you can't see because of the rips. And nowadays, and then like I said, mid build, I found out, oh, somebody had done a complete 3D scan and then flattened them all out. And I was like, oh
yeah, that's another innovating thing where you can literally 3D scan now, like because I know a lot of like things on Etsy will have like a free PDF file that you can like download onto your computer. So whenever you're 3D printing something, you can see the full scale of how it works.
And from a cosplay standpoint, there's this fantastic program called Armorsmith, which you can build your own 3D model of yourself to your dimensions.
I've
And
heard of
then,
that. I've heard of that before. I've actually
yeah,
seen it once on a cosplay TV show.
yeah, I started messing around with that when he first released the public beta, and it was really rough, but the potential was there. And now it's a retail release, infinitely worth it.
It's basically
And
like mocap.
uh, yeah, except you're making it's imagine having a virtual dummy, a virtual mannequin, and then you just slap whatever you want on there. It automatically scales, and then you can print that out as a PDF, or if you're Pepakura, you can go that route. It's a fantastic program that helps. But once again, none of this was a thing when I first started any of this stuff. None of this stuff has really been on the forefront up until about 5-6 years ago. But I mean, what was it, like 5 years ago when they had that cosplay melee when Stephen K. Smith won the first season? You're starting to see TV shows and more of this stuff become to the forefront. And it makes some of those difficult builds easier because somebody else has either done it before you, has the tools to help you realize your vision. So some of us, I guess old schoolers like doing that Mass Effect armor, which was one of my first full armor sets with EVA. I'd done helmets, I'd done a couple other things. I had one other one that I had done with it, but that was a step into a completely different world because prior to that it was vacuum forming, fiberglass, making jacket molds for
I've
latex and
seen
stuff.
people like vacuum fold for Stormtrooper helmets before too.
Yep. Yeah, that's what all that stuff was vacuum formed off of a hard. Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't give it long before we start seeing things. I'm not sure if you ever heard of a video game series called Subnautica.
Oh yeah, Subnautica. Yeah, that's a scary one.
They have like that fabricator where they each just 3D print stuff right away with lasers and technology. I don't give it long before they start selling stuff like that where you can just download the program, put in your height, your weight, and within a couple hours you'll have a full set of cosplay armor right there.
As far as 3D printers have come just in the past couple years, I mean, I have a relatively recent one and it's already outdated. That has changed that landscape quite a bit too, because the software to learn how to model, the fact that you can get a 3D printer relatively inexpensively and the parts are stupid cheap in the broad scheme of things. We're getting Sintra or Warbler or something else as a supply would have been more expensive. It cost me a nickel. Let's say I did a helmet for a commission for a Starkiller from the Force Unleashed.
Ooh,
and
nice.
The only reason why I didn't do the whole helmet in one piece was because my bed was just like 1/8 of an inch too short for the little swoop at the end, so I had to do it in 16 different parts. But otherwise, yeah, I'd have just printed it and forgot it, hopefully not have a malfunction. But even if it did, I'm only out the time, and it's like less than $1 worth of PLA for like even that big of a build, never mind the whole one. So that's changed it. And I think we're going to see more and more printers geared towards miniatures, statues, cosplay stuff, prefabs for or pre-visualizations for things. But yeah, a lot of this stuff is just changing the whole face of it.
Oh yeah, no, and more people can afford this stuff because, like I said, back then you had to have either the money or you had to be working one of them jobs that you had to use a 3D printer.
Which is also why I think you're seeing more and more cosplays come to the forefront too, because there's more and more companies that offer even more suits, like my Spider-Man suits. God, I could probably name 4 different companies off the top of my head that make top shelf suits that aren't even the best out there. But they're reasonable is what I'm getting at.
Oh yeah, no.
So with that, and then when you can walk into a Joann's and see Yaya Han foam right off the shelf.
She has her own line of cosplay fabrics and everything.
Yep, and Evil Ted Smith has his silicone molds and Michaels and his foam, and then Stephen K. Smith has his stuff. I mean, there's a lot of these big name guys that are big now that nobody would ever heard of a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, no, people like Yaya Han, Mold Cosplay, Jessica Degree, and all them. Kamuya Cosplay is another good example.
Svetlana's awesome.
Yeah, they're kind of like the pioneers of big builds, and I've seen a lot of Kamuya Cosplay stuff on Instagram, and just the sheer fact that she can make like Aloy's armor from Horizon Zero Dawn or Monster Hunter or just these big builds, like seeing people take the time for these big builds, whether they've been doing it for a long time or they just started. It's amazing,
Hmm.
honestly. Like so
Yeah.
that's something I can never do. I'll pay someone to do that stuff.
Well, that was one of the reasons why I started the business when I did, is because everybody would see what we had built. And I don't have the time, or I don't have the know-how or the tools or whatever. Could you build this for me? And it wasn't until after one of the years, the second year of Eugene Comic Con, or maybe it was the first. My timeline's all messed up because everything happened so rapidly. Um, that I ended up creating with my now son-in-law, Nightingale Studios here locally, and started doing commission work for people that either weren't confident enough or didn't have the tools at hand. And one of our first commissions was doing a sword for a local author that was a hand sculpted dragon head, and and then the blade was made out of XPS foam. And then we did some stuff from Legend of Zelda, and then we just started, the ball started rolling. I did multiple ODSTs for people, uh, just cosplay daggers, repaints of Nerf guns, things like that. That people either don't have the artistic skill, patience for, whatever. That's what there are gaps that need to get filled. This last year has been really rough for a lot of makers because people had a lot of time and a lot of money and figured, I'll give it a shot myself. And then you don't have the conventions to warrant people needing stuff.
Yeah,
So
no,
it tanked horribly.
I've seen a lot of people making these big cosplays for con, and then you hear about COVID, so it's like there goes that time and effort and money that they just
Yep.
wasted for that cosplay that
Yeah.
they may or may
This,
not be able to get to show off.
sure. Or make any money off of, because a lot of it's advertising and some of our appearance fees. Hell, even when they canceled the free comic book day, things like that. I lost, I don't even know how much within the span of a month and a half when they started canceling Medford Comic Con here. Metal Art got canceled. Free Comic Book Day got
And I'm
canceled.
at Bird.
Yeah, all that. Birthdays and stuff, because I professionally cosplay Spider-Man.
Yeah, I remember seeing you did something like that for Free Comic Book Day a
Yeah.
few times for
Hmm.
Rogue City Comics.
Did Rogue City for their first year anniversary. I've done Iguana almost every year. I try to make my rounds when I can, but once again, it depends if stuff's up there. When they did the soft opening for the retro wormhole, I was down there as a Ghostbuster. Um, but what I'm saying is, like, at one point it was a self-sustaining industry. I didn't have to work a day job. I was making enough off of that, and everything was steadily enough. I
Basically,
wasn't rushing
it was
jobs.
like a career,
Yeah,
basically.
it was well on its way, even here. And a lot of my customers were up north and stuff, but then when it started trickling off, it just was like a hard cut. Oh, we're done. And
I
there was
know.
nobody needed anything. It
Not
sucked.
no no one could afford it. No one could afford it because money was tight for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Even if they had the time. And that's where it was a drawback. And like I said, I've got some stuff that I had started, like the Civil Warrior, which is like a Iron Man, Captain America. I started that, and then when they started canceling cons, I was like, well, I'll move on to something else. And then I have a accurate Halo 3 ODST in my shop that had never seen the light of day, because it was like, what's the point? I can't really invest anything into it if there's no return back on it. And those are more builds like for other people. Those are just to show off. As far as like a personal project, I love. In fact, right before you got a hold of me, I was actually finishing a 3D print for my Proton pack. So some of that personal fandom stuff, yeah, I'll mess with that all the time, whether there's a convention or not, because it's just kind of cool to just have it.
I hear. I'm glad the
Yeah.
conventions are making a comeback, and
Oh, sure.
I've seen a lot of conventions online say we're going to be having this convention, but just so you know, what was it? Rose City Comic Con, I think, had a thing where you weren't allowed to go unless you were fully vaccinated or had a 72-hour
It was,
COVID,
yeah.
negative COVID test.
Yeah. And you had asked about Rogue City. We got kind of sidetracked there with that kind of restriction. It was a 48-hour negative test, which we had to go do the day we left, or a full vaccination with proof. I have no problems with that because there was a lot of kids. There was a lot of elderly people. There was a lot of special needs people,
Oh yeah,
at
no,
risk, whatever.
you have
I,
like multiple people,
yeah,
especially kids. Their
and
parents
I'm
want to take their kids to this kind of stuff. So it's under.
totally cool with that.
Hey,
And
if cons do that from now on,
fine.
until COVID is officially, that's perfectly okay.
Yeah. But
Because
with
you're
that, there's people politically minded the opposite direction that would have an issue. So what I was saying earlier with some of the restrictions, the guests that back out, scheduling conflicts, whatever, it was still fairly packed every day. Saturday
I've
was the
seen
big one.
I've seen pictures and videos
Oh, it was
of
crazy.
Rose City.
Yeah. And there was a lot of vendors that didn't show up. Partially because, it's expensive, nobody pays their travel expenses. And if their vendor booths cost a ton and, they don't have their demographic there, what's the point? And I get that.
Oh yeah, no, and vendor, money is what helps the con continue to be
Sure.
a con. Like
But
I
that's
was.
got to be people through the door,
Oh yeah, no, I was talking to some people who have a Instagram and Facebook page called the Fans POV. We were talking about how the pandemic's changed the con scene, and we were talking about how some of these major cons, like these cities that host these cons, that this is a city's major moneymaker, and if
Sure.
that con's not making money, then the city's not making money, and if that
Yep.
con's not making money as well, then that con is just that con's gone. No one will be able to go back to it ever again because it wasn't making enough money.
Yeah. And, I was amazed that Silicon went on as smoothly as it did. I was really happy to see that Dragon Con did last weekend.
Oh yeah, no, I've heard Dragon Con did really well this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
I again, I talked to some cosplayers on the series who said that Dragon Con for 2021 was so well done.
And that's essentially just a nerd herd gathering, for lack of a better term. There aren't really vendors there. There aren't really anything. It's just people getting together in costumes as whatever, which is fantastic. I wish there was more of those, like one on each side of the country, but
Oh yeah,
we can dream.
right.
That one isn't really a media con just yet.
Give it time.
Yeah, I think within the next 5-6 years, it might be, if not sooner. But I know the core people are fighting that, which is good. I'm glad to hear that.
They're trying to make it one of those official cons.
Yeah, and I think it needs to stay what it is, just people to go out. I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger every year, and more people are going there for what it is. And I think that's where the fight's going to come back the other way. Silicon, the one in California, New York City Comic Con is this weekend. Yes. And that's going to be a big one because, that's on the cusp of Afterlife coming out and all that stuff, which should help tremendously.
Right.
Not just with that convention necessarily, but just revitalizing some certain fandoms and interest in some of these bigger events that weren't a thing for the past couple of years. Because, like you said, this may be the year that's going to make or break a lot of them. If they didn't do well, they might not show up next year.
Oh yeah, no. Now, for cons themselves, what advice would you like to give for first-time con goers? People who are thinking about going to cons in the next couple of years.
Just as fans or as cosplayers?
Both. Or people who are like they hear about a con, but they're like kind of like, I don't know if I want to go to this con.
If they're any kind of a fan of anything or have any level of interest whatsoever, ideally I'd say do it. The worst you're out is the time and maybe the entrance fee. One of the biggest things that I've seen, and I dealt with quite a few people I don't want to say dealt, but I met quite a few people at Rose City this past weekend, and a lot of younger kids, it was their first time. Now, some of it's overwhelming.
Oh, I imagine. I mean, I honestly think if you're going to go to a big con, take some friends or family with you.
Yeah, exactly. And this woman had her son, I think he was like maybe 9, and it was his first. And he might be a good example of what we're talking about. He did it. It is overwhelming. And I was telling him, say, look, just enjoy it. I said, like, over there, there's fun. Over there, there's fun. Whatever you're interested in, there's going to be something here. And it's okay. I was like, look, I'm old enough to be your dad, and I'm out here in a costume. It's fine to embrace that kind of stuff. If you want to dress up, great. If you don't, that's cool too. If you want to go there just to see what it's all about, that's fantastic. Whatever your level of interest is, dip a toe into that pool, find out. If you want to just wear a Halloween costume off the shelf as your cosplay, do it. If
that's perfectly fine. It's also in that cheap price range as well.
Yeah. You don't have to go crazy and spend you know, the money that I do. You know, I still get flack from the girlfriend on one of my Spider-Man suits, but you know, um, you could put as little or as much effort into it, but at the very least, make that plunge and just check it out.
Oh yeah, no,
But
definitely.
it is rough for people that have no exposure to it prior, and with little kids. My son-in-law does a really good 1-to-1 Dark Knight Batman, you know, and he's 6'3", and we've done like the Batman versus Superman day down at Barnes and Noble and some other stuff before they moved back to Utah. It's a hell of a thing to see these little kids, you know, because they're instantly looking up, and to see
Oh yeah.
him in person. And that's why I like a lot of times at Spider-Man, I'll get down to their level, because that's and it's not just children exclusive. You know, a lot of adults that don't realize what they're walking into for the first time. That's a lot to take in
Oh yeah, no. I mean,
across the board.
and you also got these young cosplayers who are getting into it, and they have this. And I've talked to this a few times with some cosplayers. There's those young cosplayers, your newbie cosplayers, or your what Gen Z cosplayers who think that, oh, so this is what cosplay is. I have to do stuff like this. I have to make these big cosplays if I want to get noticed or someone to like my cosplay.
Yeah, and I've also seen a lot of specific demographics, and I'm all once again, we need to be clear. I don't really care what anybody's into. Do it. Okay. I've built stuff for people from things that I have no clue what they are, but I'll build it for them. You know, I'm not, you know, fandom shaming in any way, shape, or form, but there are very specific demographics or interests. Anime being probably the top one that
Oh
has
yeah.
its own subculture. You know,
Oh
I'm all for the performance end of stuff, because you know, as Spider-Man, especially birthday parties or at conventions and stuff, you know, it is a character thing, it is a performance. I get it, whether I'm there as a professional, whether I'm there as a guest, or just showing up. I wasn't so much at Metal Arc, it was just kind of fun being around as a Ghostbuster and all that kind of stuff, just, you know, the look of it. But there seems to be that mentality spreading out, and it's not bad, but it gives, like you said, people the wrong impression that they might have to go full out. They're going to have to be whoever they dress up as, and you don't. It's kind of cool if you're comfortable with it, but see, we go back to what I was saying, that comfort level, whatever your level of interest is, whatever your comfort level is, the first step's going to see what it's about. My brother isn't into really any of this stuff, but when he lived in San Diego, he would at least go outside the convention center and look and see all the costumes and stuff, because that was his comfort level.
Oh yeah, no, that's the best thing about San Diego Comic Con. You don't have to go inside to see all the stuff.
Yeah, that and BlizzCon, you really don't. And that was his thing. He would just stand out there and look at everybody, and it wasn't to, you know, to do the whole thing, was like nerd or anything like that. No, he was just like, wow, wow.
I
But
feel like that's also a good way to, if you're considering going to your big cons, and if they have the stuff outside the con, I feel like that's a
sure,
good way to get introduced to what cons are like
some of
before
them have parades.
before you spend the money to go inside.
Sure. Dragon
Um,
Con has their opening day parade. BlizzCon has
nice.
that big meet and greet outside. Silicon does that. The big Star Trek convention in Pasadena used to have a big meeting out on the steps outside. That's a fun one to
Nice.
go. Yeah.
Nice.
So there's, once again, level of interest. Go and see what it is. If you get freaked out by all the people walking in, or don't think it's appropriate for you or your children, or you don't really want to take the next step, then you don't have to. But at least you made some kind of an effort wherever you want to go.
Exactly.
So that's what I would say right off the bat there for even just attending. And the same thing would go with the cosplay end of it. I mean, that advice spreads to both. If you're the slightest interested in cosplaying, like we discussed earlier, there are worlds of information out there, tons of tutorials. The drawback to that, though, is that it is a little overwhelming. It
It can
really
be.
is. Yeah. So work to your comfort level. And
Exactly.
if you like the way it looks, who cares?
Exactly.
You know,
Um,
if you like it, that's all that's important.
oh no, I wholly agree. Two more questions before we end this.
Sure, absolutely.
Any future cosplays you have in mind that you always wanted to do but never had the time to do it?
Uh yes. And now I'm kind of torn, because there's another version of it on the way, and that would have been one of the still suits from the original Dune. no
Oh,
matter
that's
what
right.
you're,
They're coming out with the reboot for that.
yeah. And I've been looking at the armor differences and the still suit differences. I always really liked the original look. Never mind the movie being so far away from the source material, the look, the aesthetics. I love
The
those
classic
suits.
80, the classic 80s look.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that retro future, whatever you want to call it, that David Lynch had with that movie. That's always been on the top of my list. I've seen other people do it. The methodology is something that's a little out of my experience level with sewing. That's why I had my son-in-law. He was a tailor. I'm not. But that one, and um, and kind of in respect and honor to a friend of mine that ran the Portland Superheroes Coalition, I'd also like to tackle an Iron Man, but I don't know which one would come first because I didn't see a single Iron Man at Rose City, and I've not seen one around here locally. So it'd be kind of nice to fill that gap here within 100-mile radius, so to say. But the Dune one was always been on the top, but it's just like that's a
That's a
that's
lot
a
of sewing, and I just can't
yeah, and
imagine.
it's latex covering over urethane foam, and I just yeah, I'm not. I've seen ways of doing it with wetsuits and stuff, but that's when I saw that opening day in 80, whatever the hell it was, and I don't know if I'm quite that confident
Right.
on that.
I mean, like I said, there have been cosplayers who've been doing this for a long time, and a really long time,
Hmm.
and they're always still learning new things.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, you can be doing this for a long time, but at the same time, your skill level could be like just like any basic starter
Yep.
cosplayer
Oh,
who's
oh,
just
absolutely, Wayne. And that's the other thing too. Availability of tools, availability of techniques, all that landscape change that we were talking about. It's this huge paradigm shift from maybe mid 90s on, and then you started seeing everything explode, and then
Mhm.
thankfully the MCU really helped with bring that. I love it or hate it, whatever your opinion is, it made the geekdom or nerddom or whatever you want to call yourself, the fandoms
Mm.
acceptable on a much broader scale
No,
and
definitely.
recognizable. Even if I've been a fan of Spider-Man since I was 4 years old, and okay, that's great for me. It's just nice to be able to not have to, Psst, hey buddy, you read the new Spider-Man comic, I can actually say it out loud, kind of stuff. It's wonderful that this whole world is opening up, and there's really no difference between comic, sci-fi, fantasy fandoms than there is from sports ones, because those guys go out there painted up with numbers and colors and stuff on them. It's an expression of fandom. That's all
Hmm.
it is.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
no,
there's no difference.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
To end this episode, anything else you'd like to say to last minute cosplayers and con goers?
Other than apologize for the vaping,
Hey, no, you're
it's an
fine.
yeah. Um, I you're never too young. You're never too old. It's all about just expressing yourself, no matter if you're trying to portray somebody else, or even if it's just an appreciation for something that you're into. Uh, I would say do it. Like we went back to with the advice. Uh, if I can, and I still do it, and I'm rapidly approaching 50.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I told you, yeah. And I still do it, still love to do it. I've had a few ups and downs, but it's a great group. It's a great world to walk into. It's something that is literally for everybody. I can't express that enough, that anybody can enjoy any aspect of the convention scene or cosplay scene across the board.
Nice. Well, no, I mean, like I say, it's nice to get that perspective of what it's like cosplaying for that long.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I,
there's
I
there's just hours and hours of that conversation right there, just how much it's changed over the years too.
Oh yeah, no, that's gonna be more fun to talk to for when I do that cosplayer veterans
Oh, sure.
segment, because I've there's like people who are interested who've been cosplaying since 98, 20 years, 30 years, and
Yeah.
so far you're like the only one I think who's been cosplaying the longest,
Yeah.
which it's nice. It's really nice to get that. I'm sure those who are like will be watching this and listening will realize how much cosplay has gotten like easier over the years in a sense.
Yeah. One of the ones that I had done for an event in Vegas, just since you're talking about going that far back. I actually had, it was a blackout curtain, real sheer, and a latex mask I had bought, but it was like a kid's little medieval knight chest plate that I actually added real chains to. I was like a pair of pajama pants, and I had ace bandages wrapped down from my knee down to my ankle and stuff to offset that. I would say it was something that was cobbled together because what I was looking for didn't exist. There weren't even like the fake chains at the local Walmart or anything like in our Halloween sections, which now you can go to Spirit and buy, Bago chains, Bago bones. We had to paper mache, we had to make that kind of stuff. So even going old school like that, and that was what you had to work with, and you did it. And to have all that stuff available now is great. I thoroughly enjoy. I don't hold anything against anybody that has it that readily available. I mean, right now, within seconds, you or I could go on to countless websites and have almost damn near studio quality props in your hand, ridiculously cheap.
Oh yeah, no, most definitely.
Yeah, which that wasn't a thing, and it is now. It's great.
Oh no, I wholeheartedly
It's
agree.
awesome.
I think that should about do it again, Brian.
Okay,
Thank you
sure.
for coming on.
No problem.
No, and I really do appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to having people listening to this and everything. So yeah, again, thank you for coming on for Cosplay Contalks. Get to know that cosplayer, and to those who are listening, as always, thank you for listening to Cosplay Contalks. Get to know that cosplayer. Until next time, thank you for listening, and as always, thank you for watching.